Thank you for being here.
Yeah, dear Mark Zöllner, thank you very much from my side. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. When I came my first time here to the Hoppecke place, it's 1 month ago, I was really impressed. So we already had very inspiring talks in Dresden, but seeing like such a medium-sized company in a highly competitive environment is finding its specific niches and is dealing, and that's I think really the challenge for this company, on the one hand with what is happening on the technological side in your business, and on the other hand is happening on the service side. So you're really in a very challenging sandwich position, and to see how you manage it here from Brilon, far away from the classical industrial centers. So it makes, I'm really proud of German Mittelstand, you know, to see which power is connected to this kind of business. And what I want to do, as Mark Zöllner mentioned, I just want to take you on a journey that looks a little bit behind the immediate pressures and changes from markets, from competitors, from technological development you're confronted with and you already discussed in this afternoon. Just looking a little bit more on much more fundamental trends economy and our societies are confronted with, and then to try to make a bridge to what this will mean to Hoppecke, will mean to your company, will mean to your markets, but will also have meaning on a very individual level. Because these tremendous changes are quite deep and question a little bit what was so clear for 30 or 40 years with all our economic model after World War II, and is coming now to limits that have the power to really redefine how we think about our economic order, how we think about democratic societies, and how we think with the individual sense-making processes that keep us motivated. And I'm really looking forward to see what this makes from the perspective of your specific business. And so I'm very glad that you have this very intense interaction after this talk that will not last more than 30 minutes. So what I will to do is starting with the existing paradigm that made especially the German, the European, the US, but also the Asian economies great after World War II, having a strong belief in constant growth, economic growth, knowing about the importance of globalization processes, having a high importance of scale. And I think this is especially for your business is really an issue. If you take all the battery technology and what's happening in a lot of sectors, so scale is one of the big challenges, and how to find niches within the market that is very much scale-driven, standardization, and speed. Speed especially in how to innovate and to keep up with the market that is becoming faster and faster. And adapting to these challenges, that is your day-to-day business, and it's in the heart of the economic model that is driving our societies for 40 or 50 years and make us living in a kind of prosperity the world hasn't seen in its history. And what is now quite interesting to see, and that is the starting point for these disruptive developments, that the side effects, the unintended side effects, nobody wanted to have these side effects, but the side effects of this existing economic and societal paradigm is limiting more and more this kind of model, and is bringing us to think about a complete shift, a shift to new paradigms. I will come up later. What I want to do is just to go a little bit in depth of these unintended side effects. It's ecological side effects, it's social side effects, that's just driving populism and much of political developments now, and also the economic side effects of this model that make us think about a complete shift in paradigm and perhaps have a discussion today in the afternoon. What does it mean, especially for your business, for your company, or for you personally? Starting with the ecological side effects. As mentioned, the Wuppertal Institute, as a think tank of about 200 people from very many disciplines, strongly connected to the Club of Rome. Our founding president, Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, who founded this institute 25 years ago, is the actual acting president of the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome already brought these ecological limits of growth on its agenda in the beginning of the 70s. In 72, the report on the limits of growth was issued. And the first time in this undefended belief in continuous growth, there was a first skeptical voice. And if you're now looking on what the Club of Rome has done, we see that he was absolutely right, but in this time, he just made one tremendous fault, trying to illustrate these ecological limits of growth by resource scarcity. So he give a lot of projections when the oil and other very important resources will be emptied. And this was very naive from an economic point of view, because the system dynamics models of this time didn't incorporate market effects. Because if something is becoming less and less, then it's becoming much more expensive. And there's a lot of incentive not to use so much of it. And this effect really happened. So you had rising oil prices and a lot of other resources prices. You had high incentives to find new sources for these kind of resources. And so we see today that resource scarcity is still an issue, but it will come up in much more time than already as originally projected by the Club of Rome. But what we see today, that the real planetary limits is the buffering capacities of our ecosystems. Issues like climate change that show that we are coming up with our limits, nutrition cycles, the endangerment of our freshwater resources, the loss of biodiversity. These are about 10 of the main ecological challenges on a global level, brought together by the leading scientists in these different fields, and showing us that the ecological capacity is really challenged by our economic model, and that it's not only climate change, but a lot of other fields with the global scape that make it necessary to find a new equilibrium between our economic activity and its ecological limits. And even if we have now in the US a government that is just ignoring that effects and thinking that it can avoid much more thunderstorms on the American coasts, a lot of these much more extreme weather events, just by ignoring it, I think it will come up quite fast that this is no way to deal with these real ecological effects on the different levels. So we have to find a new equilibrium between economic activity that helps us to deliver prosperity to about 10 billion people at the midst of this century, and bringing it into a new balance with these ecological planetary boundaries. And for a very, very long time, it were only these ecological guys like us that said, oh, there are limit of growth. We have really to think about our economic model behind. And everybody said, please, dear ecologists, be a little bit calm, that perhaps it's a problem, but there are many reasons to go on like we did before. And what is now happening for 15 to 20 years, that not only ecological limits of this model become more and more visible, but also social and economic limits. And this gives this discussion such a speed and intensity. And this is a very impressive chart made by a World Bank economist called Milanovic. And it's called the Milanovic elephant because if you just put a little eyes there on the 55 line, it could be an elephant. And what is it showing? It's showing how developed the income of people in the 20 years from 1988 to 2008, depending on where are they on the world scale from the poorest on the left and the richest on the right. And if you see it on the global level, you can see that the economic model in these 20 years was a tremendous success. Tremendous success because all these people here, from the 10th to 55, 60 percentile on the worldwide scale, they had a really great rise in their incomes. And these are all people from developing countries that came into new richness, new form of middle classes, especially in China, in South America, in many Asian states. These people really had a lot of profit of the economic models of these 20 years. And then you had other winners, the very most rich people in the world as well. They were the winner of this game. But there are two groups in these 20 years. For them, there was nearly no effect. It was the poorest one, they stayed poor. And then, if you look at these 70 to 85 percentile, and these are the poorer people in the rich countries. These are the Rust Belt workers that lost their jobs. These are the people in the rural industry that lost their jobs. And these are the people that are now voting for Trump and all the other populists. Looking on this economic model, saying, okay, you tell us GDP, there was a big growth, everybody profited, but I feel nothing. For 20 years, I stayed poor. I lost my job. My kids don't have a better opportunity. And so you see that this economic model, putting its concentration and concentrating on economic growth on a general scale and not looking on these distribution issues is a real threat, not only for economic, but also for our democratic model. Because these people and these dynamics are now abolishing our democratic orders. Look what is happening in the US and a lot of other countries. So we have to rethink how to design our economic model that it's coming up with something that keeps our societies together. And this is a very impressive study showing in which direction we have to think about. A comparative study of a lot of countries to see what is really driving the issues that create high quality of life in countries. So they look on how many criminals in this country, how many pregnancies, pregnant young girls you have, what is about the health status and all these issues. And if you try to draw a correlation, so what are the countries that are the best in these quality of life indicators, interestingly, it is not correlated with the growth, economic growth in these countries, it's correlated with the level of equality in these countries. And Richard Wilkinson is just putting it on the very nice point, saying, if you want to live the American dream, you have to move to Sweden. And that means if you are born as a poor black American, statistically, there is no chance that you ever escape from your social status. There are some very single exceptions of it. And in the American culture, it is really possible by these exceptions to keep this completely post-factual dream aware. But statistically, in Sweden and a lot of other countries, if you are born in the poorest part of the society, you have a quite fair chance to make your living to another social status. And in the US, it's nearly impossible, and that is bringing this nice quote of Wilkinson to the point. So when thinking about economic development, we have to rethink the issues. And what is quite interesting, that even in economic terms, this model is coming to limits. And the financial crisis of 2008 demonstrated this quite intensely to us. And I think this is quite strongly linked to your kind of business. You are doing real value production. So you're producing real things. You're solving real challenges, producing security in many terms for people that fear about losses, interruption of electricities, make shop floors run on a very smooth way. So that is real value production, real value added. When looking on what is and has driven growth in the global economy, it's much more on a virtual and a financial level. And this is what created this trouble in 2008, that you had a financial industry that was the main driver of economic growth, especially in Great Britain and the US and all the countries that reduced the share of industrial production, and that all the dynamics of the financial expansion created much more danger of economic bubbles, like we had it with the housing investment bubble in the US, and it broke down in 2008. And so it's quite interesting to see, and I just took this book by Wolfgang Streeck, who shows like this is also a real danger for this kind of democratic capitalism we had over the last 60 years, because this very fragile equilibrium between economic development on the one hand and guaranteeing a fair distribution to the people that don't have the same chances was for a very long time financed by continuous growth, so that you have something you can redistribute. And from the 70s, by rising state debts, you kept this momentum, and then you had the consumer debts in the 90s that kept the momentum. And with 2008 and a much more globalized capitalism, these equilibrium mechanisms become weaker and weaker, and also make it for a company operating here with a headquarter from Germany more and more difficult to be in competition to countries where not the same social and democratic standards are existing. So also from this economic point of view, it's necessary to think about new elements, how to shift this paradigm to come to an idea how welfare prosperity on a global level can be produced that is not creating these kind of side effects. Prosperity that is within the ecological, social, and also the inherent economic limits, which is given to all of our economic activity. And this creates an intense discussion about issues like resilience, how to make systems much more stable, self-sufficient, subsidiarian under these conditions. Also, I think a quite interesting issue to Hoppecke, if you have a trend more to autonomy, decentralization, battery systems can be a very important part, can be a technological basis for these kind of organizing economy and societies. Sufficiency, so coming up with my own demands and bringing it together with these ecological limits. Quite interesting effect that people that are using their own produced renewable energy are much more aware about energy consumption. So the kind of how you are producing your energy has a direct effect how you're using it. So also interesting issue, I think, for Hoppecke as well. Forms of diversity and then decentralization. And these are all issues that have a high importance for the Wuppertal Institute, being a think tank that is just trying to explore these new ways of designing our economic and political systems. A very challenging issue because it's quite difficult for politicians to bring it on the agenda. And even a Green Party here in Germany talking about post-growth and sufficiency, you will, in this actual election campaign, will not hear a lot of it because we are so strongly connected to this old paradigm that it needs new forms of examples and models to really bring it forward. And so that's a little bit the role of a think tank like the Wuppertal Institute to design some of these kind of role models. And what is quite interesting, and this will be the last chart, is that what I just explained here on a societal level, this way, like it is called in the discussion, from expansive modernity, and modernity means all these values that are important for us. Individual development, having a freedom to design your life, having a high diversity, have the chance to personal growth. This makes modern societies not being restricted by religion, by ideology, but having this possibility for individual self-development, to bring it together not only with the expansive economic model, but also think it on the economic basis that is staying constant. And so what could it mean to think in such kind of reductive modernity? And what is now interesting here for our discussion in this afternoon, what does it mean on an organizational and individual level? To come from a situation where, as corporation, as company, you're under a constant and rising pressure. And I think this pressure will even be much more intense in the next years for a company like Hoppecke, if you look on the global trends, how to come to an organizational model that is resilient, and I think I was really impressed what I up to now learned from Hoppecke, find niches that can be a little bit protected and separated from these megatrends on a global level, find new interactions with political partners to design these kind of much more decentralized autonomous regional units and being a part of it. So develop the business model in fields where you took out a little bit this kind of pressure, and to think about the consequences on the individual level, because what is here happening on the organizational level leads to things that you can feel every day when dealing with your 100 to 150 emails every day. Staying active with a lot of energy to keep up with all of these kind of pressures, having much more challenge to find work-life balance, to a model that comes to a new empowerment of self, new processes of personal sense finding, and it's quite interesting. I think you all made, I know it from my personal experience, this experience when I'm confronted with this generation Y, these young people that want to have work-life balance, who say, no, the job is not on the first place. And with our generation confronted with these people, I think, hey, looking at my own youth, it was clear I had to be agile and always engaged, because this was my kind of self-definition. But if you go a step back and seeing that these young people have a very, very good understanding what is happening out there. And knowing exactly just going into this kind of paradigm is also on the individual level no long-term solution. And so we are quite thrilled to see that even the most brilliant people from this generation going into complete new models of welfare production, trying out new forms of social business, because they feel very exactly that this paradigm is breaking more and more. And so they are little decentralized cells of bringing forward complete new forms of thinking prosperity of the future. And I think for every company, it's a quite interesting but very valuable challenge to integrate these kind of members of this new generation, because they can also be a solution to find perhaps new organizational answers. So this is the framework we are thinking in, and as I mentioned, it was a journey in a very fundamental new form on looking what is happening on the political and economic arena. And I'm now looking very much forward to what this is making with you now in the World Coffee situation, because for us it's always a challenge not only to translate these issues in appropriate form in the political and societal arena, but also in the corporate world. And having been so impressed by what Hoppecke has reached over the last 90 years on adaptation to very massive changing environmental conditions, I'm really interested how this company will deal with these kind of challenges within the next 20 to 30 years. Thank you very much.